The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Chairman, the heart of this particular debate in part one is the purpose clause, and the purpose clause sets out in a reasonably anodyne way that it's about obtaining information from returning offenders and establishing release conditions for offenders who come back to New Zealand having spent at least a year in a jail overseas. Well, overseas is a euphemism. We're not talking about overseas, Mr Chairman, we're talking about Australia. We know the purpose of this bill is because we're going to have a flood of people sent back to New Zealand because of the changes to the Australian Migration Act 1958, which was changed last year. And I want to ask the Minister why she did not act earlier if the purpose of this bill is actually to protect the safety of New Zealanders, and there isn't a person in this House that doesn't want to protect the safety of New Zealanders. Why we left it so late to pass this legislation through the House? We've got 861 deportees about to flood back into New Zealand. 861. But it's worse than that, Mr Chairman, because already in the period, I think between May and September of this year, 157 offenders have already been deported back into New Zealand. Now, I want to ask the Minister, what was the offending of those 157 people? What level of risk do they pose to New Zealand society? And why did she do nothing, knowing these people were coming back, having known that for a year, 157 people coming into New Zealand that we don't know what they did, what level of risk is they pose to New Zealand, or what things are in place to protect New Zealanders. Now, I sat in this House the other day to be accused by the Prime Minister of protecting rapists and murderers from Christmas Island. There were none there. But amongst this group of 157, there very likely will be some rapists and murderers. So when the Prime Minister can direct an accusation to the rest of the House about we were backing the rapists and murderers and not worried about public safety, I want this Minister to come clean and say, why has this negligent government allowed 157 people who have offended overseas to come back into New Zealand, some of them possibly rapists and murderers, and why was there nothing put in place in a timely way to protect New Zealanders against that? The purpose of this bill, Mr Chairman, is to protect the safety of New Zealanders. We are accused of backing rapists and murderers, yet the government sat on its chuff and did nothing, while 157 offenders came back in this country without any release conditions at all, without the knowledge or the information on those people that the New Zealanders have a right to know. Now, the Minister has known about this and the pending flood of deportees that the Australians very kindly are dumping in New Zealand for over a year.
No.
For over a year.
No.
Why do we get legislation not at the 11th hour, but the 13th hour? Because there's already 157 of those offenders here, and there's a whole lot more coming. And I think it's a fair question, Minister. Why could we have not put before the House this legislation a year ago? Is there any reason why we could not put this legislation designed with the purpose of protecting the safety of New Zealanders before the House in a timely way? We have had no explanation of that. Now, I want to say, Mr Chairman, that if we were looking at the purpose of the bill, which was to protect the safety of New Zealanders, the first thing we would have done is had the guts to stand up to Australia and say some of those people should come back to New Zealand and we will deal with them and we will have proper provisions in place, but some of them are your responsibility. If a kid goes to Australia, aged 6 months old, has lived there for 30 years, has children who are Australians, parents who are Australians, they're shaped by Australia, why is it our problem? And did our government have the guts to stand up to the Australian government and say it doesn't protect the safety of New Zealanders to send people to this country who don't know this country, who have no support mechanisms, who have no friends or family here? They will be alienated. They will be angry that they're separated from their family. And the Australians, our mates the Australians, have put the problem on us. So if we want to achieve the purpose of this bill under Clause 1, Mr Chairman...
I
Mr.
call
Chairman,
Materia 2 right.
Speaker.